So, like I said, we had talked before about the Declaration of Independence. That was when the people living here in America that had come over from England, they finally decided that they didn't like the king or his rules or his laws, so they decided to make their own country. Who remembers what was one of the reasons or one of the problems that they had with the king? What was one of the reasons why they were so mad? Violet?
He would never listen to any of them.
He wouldn't listen to them when they told him that they didn't like the laws or they didn't think they were fair. They didn't really listen. Now, when they decided to make their own country, it's a fine enough idea to just go, "Oh, I make my own country," but you have to figure out, well, how is your country going to work? And that's exactly what the Constitution does. The Constitution is what tells the government how everything should work. It's kind of like the document that gives people their jobs. It tells people this is what you are going to take care of, and this is what you are going to take care of, and this is what you are going to take care of. That way, everybody knows what is their responsibility, what is their job, what do they have to do. It tells us how our government should work. Bella, make sure we're paying attention. So, after writing the Declaration of Independence, it wasn't just as simple as America saying, "Oh, well, we're not going to be part of Britain anymore." Remember, that made the king very upset, very angry. So, they fought a war over it. After the war, America won and they won their independence. So, after they won the war, Great Britain basically had to say, "Okay, fine, we're going to leave you alone. You're your own country now. You're not part of England anymore." And they had to make up their own government. So they had to figure out, well, okay, we didn't like how the king was doing things. We didn't like that he wasn't listening. So how are we going to be different? How are we going to make sure that our government is better? So in 1787, they had the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia to make a plan to decide, how is our government going to work? How is it going to be better? So there were a bunch of different men who attended the convention, and they ended up writing Constitution. Because they were the ones who wrote it, they were known as the framers of the Constitution, which is not a bad term to give them. The Constitution is kind of like a frame for our government. It shows how everything is going to be set up. So some of the people that were there were people like Benjamin Franklin, Washington, Madison, and they all kind of brought their own ideas of how the government should work, what should be the government's job, what um what kind of powers should the government have, what are they able to do, what are they not able to do. Because again, they were very worried when they made this constitution about ending up with another king. They didn't like the way the last king was treated them, so the last thing they wanted was to have another king. They wanted to make sure that in this new government, the new one that they were creating, that there would never end up being a situation like what had happened with the king, where there's one person in charge of everything, making all the laws by themselves. Because if that one person wasn't a very nice person, you'd end up in the same situation. Someone who doesn't listen, someone who just wants to make rules and laws that are fair just for them and not fair for everyone. So, George Madison was the one who had a good idea about a strong central government, a national government. And they called his ideas the Virginia Plan because that was where he lived. He was from Virginia. Because they used his ideas as like a big chunk of the Constitution, they do call him the father of the Constitution. So even though he wasn't the only person whose ideas went into the Constitution, a big chunk of them came from him. So by 1790, all of the 13 colonies, the 13 original states, ratified the Constitution. What that means is the 13 states took a look at the Constitution, they read over it, and they all decided this sounds like a good plan. We all agree. We think this will work. So they all agreed to it. They all signed it. They accepted it. So the Constitution has principles. The principles explain how the government works. Kind of like a set of rules. Like when you get a new board game, you know how you open up like Monopoly or checkers or things like that, and you take off the lid, and inside there's a list of rules, and it tells you you can do this and this and this, and it tells you you can't do this or you can't do that. That's kind of what the Constitution does for our government. It tells our government you're able to do this, this, and this, but you can't do this, can't do that. It's like laws for the government. So they explain what the government is supposed to do, and it explains what it shouldn't do, what it should let the citizens do on their own. There are a couple of like core principles or key principles for our Constitution. So one is limited government. They wanted to make sure that, again, they didn't end up with a situation like the king. They didn't want the government to have all of the power. They wanted the citizens to have some kind of freedom, some kind of power of their own. So they didn't want the government to be able to interfere with or get in the way of the rights of the citizens. One of the other principles is the rule of law. That means that the country should follow the laws that it creates, and that the laws apply to everybody. That there's nobody that can say, oh, well, the law doesn't apply to me because I'm too important, or I'm too special, or I'm this, or I'm that. That we should make laws that are fair to everybody, and because they're fair to everybody, everybody has to follow them. Not just, oh, I feel like it today and I don't feel like it tomorrow. You have to follow them whether you want to or not, because they are designed to be fair for everybody. Another principle is majority rules. So that's like voting, like what people are doing right now. There's early voting for the election right now. That's part of what goes into that. So when there's a decision that's being made, whether it's us voting for who we want to represent us, whether it's people voting for new laws, when you have a choice, the choice shouldn't just come down to one person going, we should go with this. Everybody gets a say, everybody gets to vote, and whichever one gets the most votes is the one that we go with. So if most of the people want one thing, that's what we end up with. Now, to make sure that that doesn't become a problem, there's also the idea of minorities' rights. So minority rights does mean that whether you're part of the majority, the people that wanted something, or whether you're part of the minority, people that didn't want it, you do still have rights. So even if a lot of people, like they vote for something, and whatever they vote for, whatever the law is, there can't be a law that even if a lot of people wanted it, that it would be unfair for other people. That everybody has rights, even if they don't agree with everybody else. Another one is the separation of powers. We've been talking about how they didn't enjoy the king and the way he did things. One of the big problems with that is that if you have a king, the way that it was done before, if you have a king, the king is in charge of everything. The king makes the laws, he decides what's fair and what's not, and it's just up to him. Jaylene, for now, go ahead and put it away. So if the king decides well, you know what? Everybody has to give me $100 every week. That's it. There was no arguing. There was no, but that's not very fair. Or, but what if I don't have $100 all the time? The king could just say, I don't care. Give me $100 every week. $100. Friday, $100. And next Friday, $100. And the Friday after that, $100. And whether you'd agreed with it or not, you you couldn't break that. You couldn't stop that law. The separation of powers means that it's not just one person or one group making up all of our laws and our rules. They separated the government and they split it into three branches, three parts. To help with that separation of powers, they also created checks and balances. They didn't want to have one part of the government have all of the power to make the laws and put people in jail and do this or that, because that would be the same as having a king. So when they split up the powers in the government, they made sure that every part of the government, every branch, had the ability to stop the other branches. Kind of like, you know how in rock, paper, scissors, you can't just pick rock all the time and win because rock doesn't always win. And you can't pick paper all the time because paper doesn't always win. You can't pick scissors all the time because scissors doesn't always win. Our government kind of works the same way. The power is split up into different branches, so that way there's not one branch that has all the power. But each branch has the ability to stop another branch if it tries to do something that isn't fair or isn't right. This is one that, again, I mentioned earlier, the like right now that people are voting and they're doing early voting. That's part of popular sovereignty. So obviously it's very difficult. There's a lot of people that live in our country. And it'd be very, very difficult to have everyone vote every single time that they want to make a new law or something like that. So what we do is when we vote for people to represent us. Whether that's a governor, a senator, or even all the way up to president. We vote for the people that we think would do the best job. We vote for people who we think would agree with us on a lot of different issues, a lot of different things. So that way the next time they're talking about laws, whoever we vote for kind of gets to, I guess, argue for us. So that not everyone has to go down there and say, well, I don't think this is fair because of this. And every single person in the country doesn't have to do that. We elect people who think the same way that we do so that they can argue for us and they can make sure that the laws are fair for everybody, everywhere. So that was kind of their big plan, was instead of just having a king, instead of having one person in charge of everything who could do everything and no one could stop them, they split up the power of our government into three branches, three parts. And every part has their own certain set of powers and abilities and jobs. And they're all able to make sure that the other ones don't do something wrong. So the three groups or the three branches of our government are the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branch. And each of them have their own jobs. And the branches work together to come up with new laws, to make sure that people aren't breaking the laws, to make sure that the laws are fair for everyone, that the laws are safe and they're keeping people safe, and to make sure that everybody is being treated equally, being treated fairly. And if they're not, we made sure that there were ways that our government could fix laws or change laws. So that way, if a law wasn't fair or it wasn't equal for everyone, we could go and change it. We can go and fix it. Hold on, Chase. So what we're going to do now is we're going to watch a short brain pop video. Since we're going to be watching a video, I want you all to go ahead and turn your cameras off. Make sure your microphone should already be off, but just in case. Microphones off, cameras off, so we can watch the video smoothly. And let me find the okay.
Mr. Gribbers told me my mother was here with a note. That's not my mother. Dear Tim and Moby, what is the U.S. Constitution? Is it a law? From Jake. A constitution is a basic set of rules for government. It lays out how the government of a particular country works. So the U.S. Constitution does that for the United States. When our nation was founded, most countries were ruled by kings and queens. They had nearly absolute authority to make decisions for everyone and do whatever they wanted. But our founders wanted a system based on the rule of law. Everyone in the country, no matter who they are, has to follow the law. And the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land.
So like they mentioned and like we talked about, when they created our government, they wanted to make sure that we didn't end up with something like a king. They didn't want that. Because like you mentioned, the kings or queens were able to just make up whatever laws they wanted to. They didn't have to worry about if they were fair. And really, if they wanted to, the king or queen didn't even have to follow the law if they didn't want to. They could just say, oh, well, that doesn't apply to me. That's okay. But we wanted to make sure that it was fair for everybody, whether you were, in whether you worked for the government, whether you didn't, no matter who you were, everybody was fair law.
That means all other laws have to stay within the limits it sets out. Any law that conflicts with it is illegal and declared unconstitutional. Well, the people who wrote the Constitution, called the Framers, divided it into several sections. First, there's the preamble, or introduction, which sets out the goals of the document. Then come the 7 main sections, called articles. Each article covers one part of government or a key government process, like how a new state can join the country, or the rules for appointing a judge.
So the Constitution really does give us a lot of rules for a lot of different situations. Like they mentioned, if we wanted to add a new state to the United States, it tells us how we go about that. Or if we want to, someone wants to become a new judge, it tells us the rules for that and how that should happen.
Finally, we have additions to the original document called amendments. The framers knew the country would grow and evolve in ways they couldn't predict. So, the Constitution includes rules to amend or change the Constitution itself.
Now that is a really, really important part of our Constitution. So the Constitution has what we call amendments. Like he says, the amendments are changes, like an update to the Constitution. When they wrote the Constitution, they understood that if this is supposed to be how the government is going to run, they know that they couldn't see into the future or anything. So they couldn't think of every single possible thing that could ever happen or would ever happen. So they made sure that when they made the Constitution, that they made sure to leave ways that we could fix it, that we could update it. So if something were to happen and there weren't rules for it in the Constitution, or something needed to be changed, then we would be able to do that. So even today, the Constitution, even though it's our set of laws and it tells us how our government should be set up and how it should work, we can still change it if we need to. It's not stuck the way it was. It can be updated, it can be changed, and it can be fixed if we need to.
But passing an amendment is way more difficult than passing a law. Since the Constitution's creation more than 200 years ago, it's only been amended 27 times. Our Constitution is based on a few core principles. One is self-government, also called popular sovereignty. The preamble starts with the words, "We the people," in huge letters. The idea is that the American people are creating a government through the Constitution. The power to rule belongs to us. But it wouldn't be practical if we had to weigh in on every decision the country needs to make. So we elect leaders to represent us in Washington. They make choices on our behalf by passing laws, appointing judges, running agencies, all that stuff. This kind of government is called a republic. We, the people, lend our power to representatives. If we don't like how they use it, we elect someone else the next time around. If our representatives try to abuse their power, that's against the law. They can only do what the Constitution allows them to. If a power isn't specifically written there, they don't have it.
So remember, we didn't want someone that could just do whatever they wanted and everybody just kind of had to deal with it. We wanted to make sure that everything would stay fair. So, if the Constitution doesn't say that you can do it, if it doesn't say that that's part of their job, then they can't do that. They can't just go, "Oh, well, I have the power now." They can't just decide what they get to do and what they don't get to do.
This principle of limited government prevents our leaders from grabbing too much power. It's like the flip side of popular sovereignty. We, the people, start off with all the power, and the government starts off with no power beyond what we give it. State governments are another big limitation. The Constitution strikes a balance between national and state power. This system is called federalism. Delegated powers are those granted to the federal government. Like, it has the power to print money and declare war, while the states get reserved powers, like the power to establish schools and make new marriage laws.
So you notice how a lot of things in the Constitution are all about balancing things out, making sure everything's equal. The people have the power and they're just sharing it with the government. Or like how different states get to decide certain laws for themselves. Some laws, like they said, some things, some powers are powers that belong just to the country. Some of them belong to just the states. So not every state has the same laws because states do get to decide certain laws that they want to follow, that they think are good for their state. And other states might have completely different laws. A lot of times they're very similar, but not every state has to have the exact same law.
Some powers are shared by the nation and the states, like collecting taxes. These are called concurrent powers. Of course, both state and federal governments are limited by the Constitution. Besides having to share power with the states, the federal government itself is divided. The separation of powers splits control of the government into 3 branches. That ensures that no single branch will gain too much power.
And again, look at this. All about sharing, all about making sure everything is equal and even. Even the way that they're showing us here, they're showing us that all of those pieces are the same size. There's not one part of the government that's more important or more powerful than the other parts. Every part is the same as the others.
The legislative branch, which consists of both chambers of Congress, makes the laws. The executive
So really quick, the legislative branch, like they said, that's the branch that makes the laws. So Congress, which whether it's the House of Representatives or the Senate, they get together, they talk about, okay, what are some laws that we might need to have? And once someone gets to they get to talk with each other about what laws are good, and then once someone has or brings a law, and they say, I think this should be a law. They take the time, they talk about it, and they try to decide, is this fair for everybody? Is this a good law? Is it going to help everybody? Should we pass it? Should we not? Should this become a law for everybody?
both chambers of Congress makes the laws. The executive branch, which includes the president, enforces the laws.
So the executive branch, that branch of the government, is responsible for enforcing the laws, making sure that people follow the laws.
And the judicial branch, which is the whole federal court system, reviews the laws.
And so the judicial branch are the courts, like they said. The judicial branch gets to decide first if any laws have been broken, and they also get to decide if a law is constitutional, like they said. If the judicial branch takes a look at a law and they go, you know what, that law, it's not fair. It's not fair to everybody. They can get rid of the law. So even if Congress or the House of Representatives, if they thought that this was a good law, it was going to be fair, the judicial branch can take a look at it and go, no, that's not fair for everybody. That's not a good law. You got to get rid of it. You got to change it.
This division also creates a system of checks and balances. That means that each branch checks or limits the other branch's power. Like when Congress passes a law, the president can veto or reject it. But with enough votes, Congress can override the veto and pass it anyway. After a law passes, the federal courts can rule that it violates the Constitution. The highest court, called the Supreme Court, makes the final decision about constitutionality. Individual rights are another big check on the government's power. The Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, lists some of those liberties. They include freedom of speech, the right to a jury trial, freedom of the press, and protection against unfair searches.
And we're going to talk more about the Bill of Rights because it is a very important part of the Constitution. But that's part of the amendments, like they said. And they mentioned how even though this is a pretty old document, it's been around for about 200 years, they said, there's only 27 amendments. There's not very many. It's pretty tough to make an amendment to the Constitution, but these were ones that were so important that they needed to change it. And the first 10 is what we call the Bill of Rights. And a lot of the first 10 amendments make sure that there are certain things in the Constitution that protect everybody's right. And each different amendment protects a different right. And we'll get more into that when we talk about it later.
These amendments were added just after the Constitution itself was approved. Many of the later amendments cover individual rights too. The 13th Amendment outlaws slavery. 14 says that state governments have to respect the same individual rights as the federal government. 15 and 19 gave African Americans and then women the right to vote. Remember how the people have the power in our democracy? Voting is how we exercise that power. It took a while for Americans to realize that we the people includes all of the people. So we updated the Constitution to reflect that. Well, that's the thing about the U.S. Constitution. It isn't perfect, but it gives us everything we need to make it, well, more perfect.
So like you said, this was an old piece of paper. This was written a long time ago. But because we're able to amend it, because we're able to change it, and because it's not something that can't change it, it's just static, it just stays that way, we're able to fix it. Even though it might not be completely perfect the way it was written back then, even though there are some things that we might need to update, to change, or to fix. We're able to do that, and we're able to make it into something that's really good and that works.
That's what it means when people say that it's a living document. As our values change, the Constitution adapts while still holding to its core principles, which I guess is its own kind of perfection. Hey, I really have to get to my next class, Moby. I mean, Mom.
Okay, we can go ahead and turn our cameras back on. Now that we've watched the video, if you go to classwork and if you click on the social studies topic, you'll see that there's a quiz over the video. You're going to go ahead and click on the link. It's going to take you to BrainPop. And you're going to have a quiz over that video that we just watched. Go ahead and take the quiz now over the video.